Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we want to talk about a very interesting and a very important topic about Dockers. The goal of this course is that you at the end of this video, you get a very deep and a very essential understanding of Docker, practically and theoretically. The video consists of two parts. In the first part, we talk about the theory side of Docker, for example, what Docker is, what is the difference between Docker and VM, and where the Docker images are and how we can use them, what are the public and private Docker repositories. And after that, we go further and we talk about differences between images, Docker images, and Docker containers. And at the end of the theory part of the video, I will show you how you can create a Docker repository for your Docker images and how you can push these the Docker images of your applications in this Docker repository. And in the practical part of the video, we talk about the most important and the essential Docker commands, how we can configure Docker images, how we can work on Docker containers, and so on. So in the practical part of the video, I will open Terminal Linux and we do some practical examples so that we can learn too many Docker commands. As I said, the goal is that you get a deep and essential and detailed understanding of Docker, practically and theoretically. So you can watch the video until the end of that. So we go, I have prepared some slides. We go the slides through and we talk about each and every slide. The first slide or the first part is the Docker, the definition of Docker. So if you go to the Google and try to find definitions of Docker, you can, of course, you can find some definitions of Dockers from different people, from different websites. And as I have prepared one of them here, for example, Docker is a service that can be installed on most of the operating systems and uses the OS level virtualization to deliver us an application in some packages that are called containers or Docker containers. You can easily move it around and install and develop it. So this kind of definition you can find also in internet, but for me personally, it is a little bit confusing. For example, what is a OS level virtualization, or what are these Docker containers? So now I try to make the definition of Docker for you with simpler words, so that we can understand it easier and better. Guys, when you hear the word of Docker, you can think on a virtual environment. That's it, a virtual environment on your laptop, on your machine. For example, when you install a virtual machine, Oracle virtual machine, for example, on your laptop, on your machine, you create a virtual environment and you can do something in this virtual environment. You can install operating systems and so on. So Docker is exactly a virtual environment on our machine. And in this virtual environment, we can do something. We will talk about it, what we can do in this virtual Docker virtual environment and what the differences between Docker and virtual machine is. We talk about the differences between Docker and virtual machine in order to have a better and to have a easier understanding of Docker. So simply, Docker is a virtual environment on our machine, and in this virtual environment, we can do something. Good. We go further. In the next slide, we compare the virtual machine with Docker, so it will be even easier for us. Before comparing that, let us talk about an operating system. An operating system, as you know, has two layers. The application layer and the OS kernel layer. The application layer is on top of the OS kernel layer. And this operating system uses the hardware layer of your laptop, of your machine. And the OS kernel is the communication, is the bridge between the application layer and the hardware layer. So this is the concept of an operating system. So an operating system has two layers, application layer and OS kernel layer, and it uses the hardware layer of our laptop. Now, when you install a virtual machine, Oracle virtual machine on your laptop, this virtual machine has only two layers, the application layer and the OS kernel layer. As you know that when you install a virtual machine on your laptop, you have to allocate some hardware components of your laptop or of your machine to this virtual machine, because the virtual machine does not have any hardware layer. It uses the hardware layer of our laptop. So virtual machine has two layers, application layer and OS kernel layer, but Docker has only one layer, has only the application layer. A Docker does not have any OS kernel layer or hardware layer, because the Docker uses these two layers of our laptop, of our machine. So this is the difference. But Docker has only this layer, so it has some advantages for Docker. The first one is that Docker has a smaller size. A Docker is normally in megabyte size, but a virtual machine is in gigabyte size. So because Docker has a smaller size, so it is faster also. It does not too much time to be started and to run. It is easier than a virtual machine. And the other good advantage of a Docker image of our Docker is that you can simply move it around. You can simply open it, you can simply develop it, you can simply change the configuration of that. So these are the good advantages of Docker. So guys, simply say virtual machine has two layers and uses the hardware layer of our laptop or of our machine, but Docker has only one layer, the application layer. And for the OS kernel and hardware layer, it uses these layers of our laptop, of our machine. So it is the difference between Docker and virtual machine. But as you know, as you see, both of them are virtual environments, just with these differences. I go to the next slide, and here we have a new topic, and they are Docker images. So what are Docker images? Where are they? How we can use them? And are we allowed at all to use them or not? So guys, here I have painted this house here as a Docker repository, just for a better imagination, for a better understanding. You have to notice that a Docker repository is not physical. We cannot touch it. There is not. We don't have something like this. It is just for a better understanding. But Docker images has also a place. I mean, I've painted here just to tell you that the Docker images have also a place for itself. And this place is called repository. Some of the guys says it is registry. There is no difference between them. Docker registry or Docker repository, they are the same. So in this repository, you can easily find too many Docker images, and you can easily use them. But we talk about the repositories. We have also two types of repositories. One of them is public and the other is private. We say what they are and what the differences they have. So in this slide, it is enough that you know the Docker images has a repository, and this repository is a special type of repository, and it is only for Docker and Docker images. So here I have typed Docker Hub. We talk about that. I go to the next slide, and here we compare public and private repositories with each other, what differences they are, and so on. A public repository, so for this repository, you don't need to have any special passwords or users or credentials or authentication or login. No, you don't know it. You can easily use the images, the Docker images in this repository. It is public and this is for free for all of us. We can use it. In the practical part of the video, I'll open the Docker Hub for you, and there we can practically see what we have there and what the images are, Docker images are, and so on. It is enough just that you know a public repository. For a public repository, you don't need any credentials, any passwords. You can just simply use it. The second type of repository, public Docker repository, is a private repository. So it's private. Some of companies, some of organizations develop their own applications in form of Docker images. And as we said, the Docker images must have a place. And this place is repository. So these organizations create a private repository for itself. And they push these images to this private repository. So if you want to use the images, Docker images in this private repository, we need some credentials, mostly passwords, username and passwords. We have to be authenticated. Only so we can use the images, Docker images in a private repository. So guys, that is the difference between a public and a private repository. With simple words, we can use all the Docker images without any credentials in a public repository, but a private repository is belong to a company, to an organization for its own Docker images and applications. And for that, we need some credentials, username and password. Here, I have typed it, usage without credentials for a public repository, and it is a Docker Hub. But here, usage only with credentials for a private repository. So this is the difference. We go to the next slide, and here we want to compare the differences between Docker images and Docker containers. I'm sure that this topic is confusing for most of us, for most of the guys who works with Docker, but don't worry, we make it clear so that it will not be confusing for us anymore. Docker images, the first one is Docker images. So a Docker image, first I will give you an example, and after that we go further. For example, you have bought a CD of an operating system or of an application, and you open the CD and you copy the files on your laptop or on your machine. So you have only the files, you have only this application on your machine, on your laptop, but you cannot still use it. It means that you have to start it. You have to do some configuration. You have to start it in order to be able to use it. So a Docker image is exactly like a package, the actual package of an application. In this package, in this Docker image, you can find, you have all of the configuration files, all of the settings, databases, credentials, network settings, everything that an application needs in order to work for us is in this Docker image. So it is only a package, an actual package. But Docker container, so in order to be able to use this Docker image, you have to start it. We have to do something with that. We have to start it in this case. When we start the Docker image, it will be started in form of Docker containers. Some of the guys say Docker layers. Both of them are true. So containers make it possible for us to use a Docker image. Without the containers, without these layers or Docker containers or Docker layers, we cannot use a Docker image. These Docker containers make, for example, the port binding for us. They bind a port from our laptop to a port in itself, because each and every image in each and every container has a port. We talk about them in the practical part of the video, but just in order to understand it better, these containers make some such things for us. So guys, if you want to make this definition, all of these words here, simpler, so that you can just understand it very, very easy and very simple, we say that when the application is pulled, application here is the Docker image. When this application in form of Docker image is pulled on our machine, it is only an image. We cannot use it. It is just an image. And when we start it, it will be containers. So guys, so simple. That is a difference between Docker image and Docker container. Docker image, the actual package. Docker container, when we start the package, it will be Docker containers. So with the use of these Docker containers, we can make some changes. We talk about that. That's it, the difference between Docker images and Docker containers. I go to the next slide, and here we will do it in the practical part of the video, and we will learn how we can create a Docker repository. So for the Docker repository, first you need to create an account, a Docker account. So this account is free, is for free, and it is easy like each and every other account. You just create it. After that, you can log into your account on the Docker Hub, and you go to repositories and you can create a repository. So by creating a repositories, you can define if your repository will be a public repository or a private repository. You can define it there. And when you have created your repository, you can push your Docker images of your applications that you have developed so simply to your repository. That's it. It's creating a Docker repository. I will show you how it is. Now, in the next slide, it will be the practical part of the video, and in this practical part, I will open the Linux terminal, and we do some practical examples, and we use the Docker commands, because Docker has also some commands like Linux, like any other operating systems. And these commands are, for example, docker pull. What is docker pull? And docker run. Or here also some of the guys may have it will be a little bit maybe confusing for some of the guys what the differences between docker pull and docker run is. We talk about that. It is not so, we make it simple with our words. And for example, docker start, docker stop, docker ps. We need docker ps, docker ps minus a. We need, they are also very important. And about docker logs, I will show you how you can debug your Docker containers. It's also interesting. For example, you have pulled an image on your machine, you have started, and now the image is in form of Docker containers, and maybe something does not work truly, so you cannot use the application. So how can you debug it? In this case, we open the logs of the Docker container, we go to the CLI, we go to the logs, and now we do we can do some troubleshootings. It is also very important and very interesting also. And Docker container port, as I said, it's for the port binding between our machine, our laptop, and the Docker containers, and too many other Docker commands that are very useful for us. So guys, as I said, the goal of this video is that we simply get a deep and essential understanding of Docker, theoretically and practically. Now we are done with the theory part, and we go further, and I will show you some practical examples. And it will be really nice if you, with your likes or comments or subscribe, let me know if the video is useful. So we go further and we do the practical part of the video. Okay, now we start the practical part of the video. In this part, we will have a look at a Docker Hub. As I said, Docker Hub is a public Docker repository, and there are too many Docker images in this repository that we can use freely. And there I will show you how you can create a Docker account, how you can create your private or a public repository. And after that, we come back to the terminal and we do some practical examples and we run some Docker commands. Good. I go to the browser and here I just type Docker Hub, simply Docker Hub. After that, I press enter. And here, https://hub.docker.com. Here is the public repository of Docker. And I click on it. So I maximize the window. Now, here is the public repository of Docker or Docker Hub. So first, I will show you how you can create a repository. As I told in the theory part of the video, for creating a Docker repository, you need a Docker account. So you can create a Docker account here. It is easy. You just need to give a Docker ID. This Docker ID can be the name of your company, the name of your team, the name of your project, or whatever you want. And after that, you give an email address here and password, and you check these two boxes and sign up, and so you can have an account. I don't create an account right now because I have one, but as I told you, it is easy. You just need these items here. So I sign in to my account. Here I give my email. So continue, and after that the password, and enter. Now I am in my Docker account. You see that I've already created some repositories here, two public and one private repository. And this is my Docker ID. Whatever you give as the Docker ID at the time of creating your account, you will get it here. For example, I have given my test repo. And as I said, it is up to you. You can give whatever you want. So here you see that we can create repository. So I will show you how it is. We just click on create repository. And after that, you get the Docker ID, your Docker ID, and now you need a name for this repository. For example, I say computer is easy. You can give whatever you want. After that, you can you have to give, or you should give a description for this repository. For example, this repo is for testing, or whatever you want. And here you can select whether this repository must be a private repository or a public repository. It is up to you. If in the theory part of the video we have told the difference between a private and a public repository, if you want that everybody can access your Docker image, your application, so you have to select public. But if the application, the Docker image that you have developed and created is only for your team, for your organization, so you have to select private. It is up to you. So in this, I will select public and I click on create. You see that it will be created. And after that, we have a public Docker repository. Now, the next step is, suppose that you have already developed your application in form of a Docker image and you want to post it here. Here you see that to push a new tag to this repository, you can do it with the use of this command. You just make a copy paste of that, and here you define the version of your application, if you want to have if you want to develop your application in different versions. So you can give the version here, and with the use of this command in the terminal, you can push your Docker image here. So that's it. It is easy. Now I log out from my account, and we go back one more time to the Docker Hub, and here I want to show you something else. Now if I scroll down a little bit, you see that here, browse over 100,000 container images. We have already 100,000 images here, and we can use all of them just for free. For example, here when I click on one of these images that we have here, if I go to Redis, for example, you see that it is official image of Redis. And if I scroll down, we have the tags here. As I told you, the tags are nothing but the different versions of that application, of that database that it is here, and you select which of these ones you want to install. And here it is the first Docker command to pull this image on your machine. It is docker pull, and after that the name of the image that you want. The name is Redis, and you have to give Redis also. So it is easy. Here is just the Docker Hub, and we have learned how we can create a repository. Now we go back to the browser, to the terminal, and we do some practical examples here. Here, for example, we want to pull that Redis image. So you just make a copy paste of that. If you click here, it will be copied, and we go to the browser. So before starting the pooling of images and starting the images and do something with the commands, we have to install Docker also. On the Docker repository, you can find an instruction for installing a Docker, but if you follow this instruction, you have to install all of the dependencies and packages of Docker. And I normally don't do that. I just install the packages that I need for my job. As I have experience, just Docker package, and there is another package, we talk about that. These two packages, these two dependencies are enough for our job. So first you check if you have installed Docker on your machine or not. For checking that, you just type docker -v and you press enter. You see, I get this message, Docker version is installed on my machine. So if you don't get something like this, it means that you don't have installed Docker on your machine, and you can just simply install it as a Linux package with sudo apt install docker.io. You can install docker -c also, but I always work with this version of Docker, and I tell you that it is okay and it is enough for all of the job. So you just give this command sudo apt install docker.io, and you press enter, and after that Docker will be installed on your machine. Because we need Docker, we have to install it. As I said, Docker is a in a virtual environment, and we have to install it. And before we go further, I have to apologize because I made a mistake in the theory part of the video. I said VM has two layers. Has is not true. VM uses two layers of our laptop, of our machine. And Docker, and I said Docker has one layer, the application layer, and it is not true. Docker uses one layer and the application layer, and it was because of the language also, simply because of the language. So sorry. Okay, now we have installed Docker on our machine, and we try to pull the Redis for example, to our machine. Here you see that, as I said, there's a command here with docker pull. But there is a difference between docker pull and docker run. If you type docker pull, for example, and after that Redis, what this command makes for us is that this command just pulls the Docker image, in this case the Redis image, on our machine, and after that we have to start it. It means Doppelarbeit. So in this case, I would say it is better if you use docker run, and after that the name of the image. So the difference between docker pull and docker run: docker pull just pulls the image on our machine, and docker run pulls the image on our machine and start it also at the same time. So I use the docker run so that I don't need to start the image after pull. There is another point here. You see that I have just given sudo docker run Redis. In this case, the latest version of Redis will be pulled and started on my machine. But if you want to pull and to start a specific version of Redis, you have to set here double colon, and after that you select one of these versions that you want. For example, one more time here, for example, you want to install this version, you do it so 6.2. It will be this version will be installed on your machine, but without this version, without defining the version, it will be always the latest version of this image, of this application, of this database pulled and installed on your machine. So we check. If I now press enter, this image will be pulled and run on my machine. But before that, I want to show you another Docker image. For example, first we want to check if we have already installed and started and pulled any Docker images on our machine or not. For that, you do it with sudo docker images. Sudo docker images. This command shows us all the images that we have already on our machine. If I press enter, you see that right now I don't have pulled and I don't have any images that runs on my machine. So we go further, sudo docker run Redis. We want to pull and start this image. I press enter after that, and you see that first my machine tries to find this image locally, and after that cannot find it, so we'll be connected with the Docker hub, and from there we'll pull and start the image on my machine here. And because I've done it already, you see that it says already exists, so it will not be pulled. But if you do it, maybe it takes a little bit time until this image will be pulled and will be started on your machine. The other point that is really important for you to know is that you see we have tried to pull and to start a Docker image, and here we have some IDs and some information about these IDs. These are the containers. We have talked about image, Docker image, and Docker containers, and these are the Docker images. And we said a Docker image is the actual package of that application or of that database, and when we start it, it will be started in form of Docker containers or Docker layers. And you see that this image consists of these containers or these layers, and at the end of that you see that it is ready to accept connection. It means that now we can use Redis for our job, for our work. Okay, now you see that I cannot use my terminal anymore. I just stop this container of running, and for doing that you just press Ctrl and C. You see that it will be stopped and it is now exited, and bye bye. Okay, now we try to run this image in the detached mode in background, so that we can use our terminal. So for that, sudo docker run -d. -d is for detached, and when we give this flag in our command, the container will be started in background and we can use our terminal further. So for that you have to just type -d, and now if I press enter, you see that this time we just get an ID, and this is the ID of the container that is running on my machine. Now so you may ask how we can check that how many containers are running, or which containers are running now on our machine. For that there is another command, and this command is sudo docker-ps. About this command we have talked also in the theory part of the video. So this command shows us the containers that are running on our machine. So now if I press enter, you see that Redis, this is the container ID, as you see here, just some part of that. And this container, I explain you something about this information that we have here. This is the ID of the container, and this container is from this image. Here under the image is Redis, because we have started Redis, and this is it is now started as in form of a container. So this container is from this image, and here is the command and created. It says that's when it is created, and the status is up, and ports. We have talked also about the port binding from our laptop, our machine, to the Docker container, and names. Here is the name of this container, for example. And about these ports, it's also important we talk about it. Now, for example, because of any reason we don't want that our container runs anymore, we want to stop it. For stopping a container, there is another command, sudo docker stop. You see that the Docker commands are really easy, and you don't need so much time to memorize them or to learn them. They are just easy. After that, after docker stop, we give the ID of the container. You paste it here, and I press enter. Now we get again the ID, and it says that this ID is now stopped. If we do docker-ps one more time, sudo docker-ps one more time, you see that this time we don't see any container here, because with the use of this command, the container is already stopped. So you may ask how we can start the container again. For that, we have another command, sudo docker, and this time start. So easy. And after that, we give the ID of the container, and I press enter. And this time we check again if the container is running or not, and you see that the container is now running. So guys, these are very good Docker commands that we really need them, and you see that they are really easy. The next command is, you may ask, for example, that you want to bind a specific port of your laptop, of your machine, with this Docker container. Okay, now we just try to start this image one more time. Sudo docker run Redis, and we check what will be happen. And after that, so if I now check the containers, we have only one container. Suppose that we want to change the port binding from our laptop and to the container. For that, I just make clear here sudo for changing the port run. After that, we have to give another flag, and this flag is -p for port. For example, we want to bind port 5001 with this Redis. So I check it one more time. The port of Redis is 6379. I make a copy of that. So sudo docker, after that run -p. As I said, -p is for port binding 5001, and I give the port of the Redis. So here the first port that you give here is the port on your machine on your laptop, and the second port is the port of that application or of that database that you want. And after that, we select the name that we want, as the image that we want. So Redis, and here you can also give this time another version for that. For example, this port is for this version. I press enter. It tries again to download the Redis, and you see that this time this version of Redis will be pulled and will be started on our machine. So if I do it in detached mode, it will be so docker run -d and -p for the port binding. I will show you how the port binding is. And after that, I press enter, and sudo docker ps. We check again how many containers we have this time. Maximize the terminal. And this time you see that we have 2 Redis containers that are running. This one is the latest version, and this one is the version 6.2. And here you see that the ports binding 5001 from my laptop to this port from the Docker container. So for example, if you have any other applications, any other services that run on your machine, on your laptop, and they use also this port. So with the use of -p, you can allocate another port for this Docker image that is running, and like this you can, because otherwise you get a problem with the port binding, and you get a problem that the port is already in use. And so you have to change the port binding, and with the use of this command you can do it, -p. And don't forget the first one more time. The first port that you give is the port of your laptop, and the second one is the port of that application, of that database, of the tool that you want. The other thing that you may, I think sometimes it will be a little bit difficult to work with a container IDs. So I just make clear here, and I want to show you something else that make the job more easier. You see that we have these names will be automatically generated for these containers, but suppose that we want to have our desired name. Sometimes it is easier to work with the containers name instead of the containers ID, because the IDs are a little bit difficult, and it is not easy to memorize them. Working with the names is easier, and especially if you have too many containers running on your machine. So how we can change the name of the containers? Sudo, this command is used for renaming a Docker container. Sudo docker rename. After that, sudo docker rename. After that, we have to give the container ID that you want to change its name. For example, in this one, in this case, we want to change the name of this version of Redis to our desired name. So I just make a copy paste on the container ID. And after that, we give the name that you want. For example, my old Redis, for example, or whatever you want. So the command is sudo docker rename. After that, the ID of the container that you want to change its name. And after that, you select your desired name, and I press enter. Now, if we check our container again, you see this time we have another name for our container. So as I said, working with the container names is a little bit easier, and specifically if you have too many containers. Now, the most important part of working with the Docker containers is the debugging of containers. So for example, we see here that two containers are up, they're running, but we don't know if there is any problem in the container log or not. So we can check it. We can go to the container log and check if everything is okay, everything works or not, and if there is problems, we can solve the problem. For checking the container log, there is another command, sudo docker logs. Sudo docker logs. For example, we want to check the logs of the first container. After that, so sudo docker logs, the ID of that container that you want, and I press enter. Now we are in the log of that container, and you see this information here and is ready to accept connection. It means that everything is working fine with the container. But we have another command to go to the CLI of the Docker image and check what we have. This command is very useful if you, for example, want to change some setting. You have developed Docker image, some Docker containers, and now you want to change something because of any reasons. And this command that we now type here will help you. So it is sudo docker execute minus -it. It will be interactive terminal, and after that we select the ID of the container, and we want the bash of that, bin bash. So I press enter. After that, you see that this time we are as a root user in this container. Now it is the CLI of this container. You see that root, and here is the container ID here for this version of Redis. Here you can do something. Here you can use some of the Linux commands. For example, ls, we don't have anything here. pwd, we are on data. And if you want to have which kind of environment you have, for example, you give environment, you see that, you get some information here about your container, and things like this you can do also in the in your container, in the CLI of your container. And if you want to go out, you just type exit, and now we are again in our Linux terminal. Okay, they are. So one more time, guys, we had a Docker pool. Just as a review, for this Docker commands, we had a Docker pool. This command is just for pooling the Docker image on your machine. If you want to pool and to run the Docker image at the same time, you have to give the Docker run, and after that, the name of the image that you want, image name. So with the use of this command, you can pool and start a image. After that, we had Docker images to check what kind of Docker images we have already on our machine. And we had the Docker PS. Docker PS shows all the containers that are running on our machine. You can also do docker ps -a, for example. This is also a good command. And if press enter, okay, got permission with sudo docker ps -a. The difference between docker ps and docker ps -a is docker ps shows only the containers that are running, but docker ps -a shows all the containers that are running, that are stopped. It is like the history of the containers. You see that here some of the containers are up, some are exited. So this command shows each and every container that we have. The command was docker run, and after that -d for the detach mode, so that you can use your terminal again. And the other command was docker stop for stopping a container, and docker start for starting a container, and docker run -p for the port binding. After that, you give the port of your machine, of your laptop, colon, and again the port of that container. And the other one was docker logs, and after that the container of the ID of that container. So you could check the logs of any container. Another topic that is very important, especially if you want to develop you want to develop your application, and you have to set too many environments variable, for example, for your application. In this case, I mean, as a Docker image. So it will be maybe a little bit difficult to type all of those environments. For example, you have users, you have admins, you have environment for proxy, for other things, and it will be difficult to give all of them like this in one command. So in this case, there is another dependency for Docker, and this dependency is docker -compose. So we have not talked about it until now. It's very important, very interesting also, and it makes the job really easy for us. And now I want to show you how it works. So for that, we go back to the Docker Hub. Here we had Redis. I just go back, and this time we try another image. For example, this time Postgres. The official image of Postgres and the command for pooling, we know that already. So here I scroll down. Here we have again the tags, and as I told you, the tags are just the different versions of that application, of the database. In here you can have a brief explanation about PostgreSQL, what it is. And if we scroll down a little bit more, you see that we have here something interesting, and it is docker-compose. So I just make a copy paste of these settings here, copy, and I come back to the browser, to the terminal. For using docker-compose, you have to create a file in format YAML. For example, sudo nano docker-compose.yml. We need something like this. The name must be docker-compose and the format must be YAML. I press enter. Now we are in the file, and I just paste what I copied from the Docker Hub, you see that there's environments. I mean, there's environment here, for example, a password for Postgres, or the admin for the name of the DB, and here is the admin of Postgres, and these are the port bindings that we had in our commands. And suppose that you have to set here proxy settings, as I told you, or something for certificates, or a network configuration here at the end of that, sub networks, and too many things. So it will be difficult if you want to give all of these settings in one command. So because of that, we have docker-compose. Docker-compose makes it just easy. You can set all of those environments and the settings that you need for your application here in this file. As I said, it is an YAML file, and after that you just can start it so simply with the use of one simple command. So I save this file here by pressing Ctrl and X. Now if I make ls, you see that now we have this docker-compose YAML, and what this file make for us is that it pulls and starts Postgres for us, so simply. And for doing that, you have to install docker-compose again. Docker-compose, and I press enter. So I know, check the version of that. You see that the version already it is installed on my machine. So if you don't have it, you have to just install it as a Linux packet. So clear. And how we can use it? The use of that is very simple. Sudo docker-compose, sudo docker-compose up. If I just run this command, Postgres will be pulled and will be started on my machine. So I press enter. You see that this time the layers or the containers will be pulled and it will be started on my machine. So you see, it makes it database system is ready to accept connection. So without the use of this docker-compose YAML, you have to give too many things here: the database name, the administrator of that, the username of that, and these things. So it will be difficult, but with the use of docker-compose, it will be so easy. Sudo docker-compose up, and now if I press Ctrl and C, it will be stopped. I just make clear here, and this time we want to start it in detach mode. Sudo docker-compose up -d or -d up. So I press enter. Oh, okay. Up, after that -d. So in this case, it will be started in detach mode. You see that the containers, it consists of two containers here in this case, one database and the admin. So clear. And now if we do sudo docker ps one more time, this time we have Postgres also, and Postgres is running, and you see that the port binding is automatically happened here for the adminer, and we don't need to do that manually. So this docker-compose makes the job also very easy for us. And again, if you want to check the containers log and so on, you can use the commands that we have learned in this video. Okay, that's it. They are the most useful Docker commands that you need for your job. I hope you like it.